Hi there, it's Florence here, and today I'm back again after a whole year since my last full tutorial where I walk you through a whole knitting pattern from beginning to end. After I uploaded the jumper tutorial last summer, I have had requests for a variety of different garments, but I think one of the most requested things has been a tutorial for knitting a pair of socks. I do knit a lot of socks, but I was reluctant to make a basic sock tutorial for a couple of reasons. Firstly, there are so many good sock tutorials on YouTube already for vanilla socks. I'm sure that a lot of them are much better than any tutorial I could ever make, so it felt a bit pointless. But also I never even knit plain socks myself. I always like to do socks that have a little bit of something going on, some lace or some cables or something like that. And so what I eventually decided to do was make a full walkthrough for knitting your first pair of lace socks. Here you can see what the socks look like. They have this really simple lace rib pattern on them that is pretty but also really easy and mindless to knit. So if you would like to knit these socks, in this video I will go through the entire process, all of the steps from beginning to end. However, even if you plan to use this video tutorial as your main source of instruction for these socks, I would still recommend downloading the written pattern. You can find it linked in the description. It is on my Ravelry page. The pattern is listed at the same price as my other sock patterns, but you can use the code half off socks or free socks to pay half the full price, or get the pattern for free, so you can pay whatever you'd like to support me in my work. Okay, let's talk briefly about the difficulty of this project. This is definitely a trickier project than the jumper tutorial that I shared last year. If you haven't knitted before, you're welcome to try this if you're up for a challenge, but you may find it a little tricky in some places. The only assumed knowledge really in this video tutorial is that you know how to knit and know how to purl. Otherwise, I will go through everything in detail. If you knitted my jumper tutorial last summer, I think that this would be a really great next step. It's definitely a bit more challenging and you'll learn a load more techniques that are really useful. Things like reading charts for lace and heel constructions for socks. They will definitely come in handy as you branch out to work on other patterns as well. In the description there are also timestamps for every different section of this video. I assume most of you will know things like how to cast on or whatever, and so you can jump to the sections that you would like to see me demonstrate. So do check the description for those timestamps, or if you want to go back and find the section later as you work through the project. Okay, I think that's everything that I wanted to say. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoy this video. If you make these socks, you can share them on Instagram with this hashtag. It helps other people see examples of the socks knitted up so that they know what they're aiming for and can get inspiration for colours or whatever. And it also lets me see them, which is fun. Let's get into the tutorial. Okay, so before we get into knitting the sock, I think it would be a good idea to briefly discuss materials. The two main materials you're going to need for a project like this, a yarn and a set of needles. Let's talk about the yarn first. To give some simple advice, which I think will ensure you're going to have a really great long-lasting pair of socks, I'd say you want to choose a yarn that is either fingering or 4-ply weight. They mean pretty much the same thing. And you want to look for one that has around 20 to 25% nylon in it, with the rest of the fibre content being predominantly wool. Beyond that, you can choose whichever one appeals to you. You could have the rest of that content be superwash merino, it could have some alpaca in it. This one I'm using I think actually has a little bit of bamboo fibre in it in addition to the wool. But I think if you choose something with 20 to 25% nylon and mostly wool for the rest of the content, you're guaranteed to get a pair of socks that are going to fit well and last well as well. The problem is wool on its own really isn't strong enough to stand up to the sort of wear that socks are going to get, especially if you plan to wear them with shoes. So 100% wool sock yarn, some people like it, but I find that it can break very easily. My last pair of 100% wool socks lasted about 5 wears, but I've never gone through a pair of wool and nylon socks. To give some concrete recommendations for sock yarns that you could try, if you're on a very tight budget, my top recommended sock yarn would probably be Drops Fable. It's a really great, very basic sock yarn that is extremely affordable, especially when it's on sale. At a slightly higher price point, but still affordable and very reasonable, I really recommend the West Yorkshire Spinners Signature 4-ply, or one of the Regia sock yarns as well. And then if you want something slightly more luxurious, the sock yarns that I've really enjoyed using have included the Isia sock, which has some alpaca content in it, so it's sort of extra fluffy. And Regia has a really great selection of sock yarns with various fibre content in it, like a little bit of yak, some silk, or some bamboo, which is what I'm using here. I haven't used this sock yarn before, so I'm not specifically recommending it. I just wanted to give it a go, and I think the colour is really pretty. Let's actually take a moment to mention the colour choice as well. Sock yarn comes in loads of really cool self-striping rainbowy colourways, but because we're going to be putting a bunch of effort into knitting a lace pattern, I would suggest choosing a bright or pale colour so that you can see the lace very easily. It will also make it a little bit easier to see what you're doing. I find black is a little bit trickier to knit with in general. This colour is great, any other sort of pastel colour would work really well. Obviously, I'm not telling you what to do. If you want to use that really crazy navy blue variegated hand-dyed sock yarn, go for it. I'm just making sure you know what you're getting yourself into if you choose to do that. Okay, onto the needles. There are a lot of different needles that you can use to knit socks. I know that traditionally double-pointed needles are really popular, but this pattern and this tutorial are made with magic loop technique in mind. So in order to use the magic loop technique to make these socks, you only need one pair of needles. These are 2.25mm, 80cm needles. You could also use 100cm needles, they'd work fine too. I like 2.25mm needles because I think that because they're thinner and the yarn knits up to make a slightly tighter fabric, it means the socks last a little bit longer than using 2.5mm needles, but you can totally use those too. It will just change the sizing slightly, so be a little bit careful. Because we're using the magic loop technique, the cable needs to be at least 80cm long. And some needles have a better cable for magic loop than others. To be honest, you can go into your local knitting shop and buy any set of needles that are 2.25mm and 80cm and you'll probably be fine. But if you would like to get a pair that it comes very highly recommended, I really like these ones from Chiagu with the red cable. This cable is memoryless, so it doesn't get any awkward kinks in it, which can cause issues when you're trying to knit. The cable can sort of get in the way a little bit. I have no such problems with these, and I know that these are super popular and a lot of other people like them too. You may also find it easier to choose a pair that are slightly pointier. Some needles are just a little bit pointier than others, and it can help with knitting the lace if you're finding it a little bit fiddly. But as I said, any pair of needles fitting these dimensions should be fine, so if you already have a pair, I wouldn't worry about it too much. Also, let's mention the sizing before we cast on. I'm just going to be showing one size in this video. This is a size that fits me pretty well, but I do have slightly larger feet. When you're knitting a pair of socks like this, the size that you choose from the pattern determines the sort of circumference of the socks. You can knit them to whatever length, so your shoe size isn't what matters here, it's the size of your foot measured like, around your foot, you know? So in this pattern I have also included instructions and charts for one smaller size. Obviously I'm not going to be walking through that so precisely in this video, but all the techniques are the same, just make sure that you're reading the right chart and cast on the different number of stitches and you should be good. What I generally find is that sock knitting is pretty flexible. I knit the wrong size for my foot all the time and I can still wear the socks just fine. Maybe you'd wear looser or tighter socks for different things, but in general, since they do have so much negative ease, I don't find it matters as much as other garments. Okay, so finally we are ready to cast on. Now there are a lot of different cast on techniques that people like for socks. A lot of people like to use a particularly stretchy cast on because this cast on edge is going to be around the top of the sock here, so it has to stretch to go over your foot. For me though, I am just going to use a long tail cast on. It's the same cast on I always use when I'm knitting jumpers or anything else really. It's so easy and I've never had a problem getting it over my foot. When I talk about different techniques, I will make sure to put the names of them on the screen. Obviously I'm knitting at a pretty small scale here on small needles, and so I'm not sure how visible all the techniques will be, but there are loads of individual tutorial videos on YouTube for each of these techniques. So if, for example, you're struggling to follow with this cast on, you can always just look up long tail cast on tutorial and you will find it with no problems. There are loads of people who will show you how to do it. Anyway, for this video, my assumed knowledge is pretty much just knit and purl. I will talk you through everything else. Okay, so let's start off with a slip knot. I'm just going to tie one like this, grab this and pull it through. I'm sure you have tied one of these before, but then I'm just going to place it on the needle and pull it tight. When you do this, you want to make sure of two things. Firstly, you want to leave a long tail. When in doubt, cut it extra long and then you can cut off excess at the end. You don't want to run out while you're doing the cast on. The second thing you want to make sure of is after you've done the slip knot and put it onto your needle like this, you want the front strand to be the one that's the long tail, and then you want the back strand to be the one that's connected to the ball of yarn. Okay, once you have done that, you want to take your middle finger and your ring finger and you want to use them to grab those two strands of yarn. Make sure it is these two fingers because we're going to be using our index finger and thumb. Grab it and then take your index finger and thumb and use it to open up the two strands. So again, this front strand is the long tail and this back strand is attached to the ball of yarn. So now I'm going to show you how to cast on a stitch. Take the needle and you want to grab this strand over your thumb from bottom to top. Now you want to grab this strand over your finger from back to front. So go behind the back and forward. And then you want to lift this strand over your thumb, over and off the needle, and gently pull the ends. There we go, I've cast on a stitch. I now have 2 stitches, so let's do that again. I'm going to grab this strand over my thumb from bottom to top. I'm going to grab the strand over my finger from back to front, and then I'm going to push that loop off the needle and tighten it, and you can see I have 3 stitches cast on. I'll grab the one over my thumb from bottom to top, the one over my finger from back to front, and use my thumb to drop that loop off, and that's 4 stitches. So you just want to keep on doing this, your long tail cast on, and you want to cast on, and throughout this video I'm going to give the numbers for the larger size. You should definitely check the written pattern if you want to knit the smaller size, but for at least the larger size you want to cast on 66 stitches. So I'm just going to do that and then I will be back. So I have cast on my 66 stitches and counted them to check. And I've also cut my long tail. I've made sure to leave enough so that I can weave this end in later, but it's not going to get in the way. So the next thing you want to do is you want to slide all of your stitches down to the other end of the needle. And as you're putting them onto this other needle, you want to count half of the stitches. So I'm going to count 33, 5, 10, 33, I think it's here. And at that point, after half the stitches, you want to sort of separate the stitches and pull the cable through. So, as you can see, I now have half the stitches that I'm putting onto this needle, and then the other half of my stitches are still sitting on the cable. And this is how we're going to work magic loop, this technique which allows us to knit small circumferences in the round using a long cable. So I'm just going to put this yarn out of the way over the back, and I'm going to start knitting these stitches. Throughout, I'm going to call these the needle 1 stitches and these ones here the needle 2 stitches. So the first 33 stitches of the round are the needle 1 stitches, and the back 33 of the needle 2 stitches. And I'm doing this so that we can avoid using too many stitch markers, because we can tell when we're going to change what we're doing based on what needle the stitches are on. Don't worry if that doesn't make too much sense. Hopefully it will be clearer once I show you when we get up to a section like that. Anyway, I'm now going to join in the round, and the first thing I want to do is make sure that my cast on edge is not twisted before I join in the round. Right now it is, so I'm just going to adjust it so that it's not. There we go, you can see that's no longer twisted. It's a little bit hard to see perhaps on the join between the 2 needles, but you can see the cast on edge goes like this without being twisted there. I'm going to be doing something called half twisted rib for this cuff of the sock. I think it gives a neater look than doing regular rib, but it's still really easy to do. The way that half twisted rib is done is we're going to knit 1 through the back loop, and then we're going to purl 1 normally and repeat that. So knit 1 through the back loop, purl 1, knit 1 through the back loop, purl 1, and so on. If you haven't knitted 1 through the back loop before, if I'm going to knit this stitch normally, what I would do is insert my needle from left to right, so into this first stitch, from left to right. To knit 1 through the back loop, I'm going to do basically the same thing, but instead insert my right needle from right to left. So there's that first stitch. I'm going to put my needle in from right to left, and you can see what that looks like. And then, just like if I'm knitting normally, I'm going to yarn over and drop the stitch off the needle. For the next stitch, I'm just going to bring the yarn through to the front, ready to purl, and I'm going to purl the stitch normally. This first row is going to be the fiddliest because it's always the fiddliest right after you've cast on. It will get much easier to do as we progress. So the next stitch is going to be knit 1 through the back loop, so I'm going to insert my needle from right to left into that stitch, yarn over, there we go, bring the yarn to the front, and I'm going to purl this next stitch as normal, bring my yarn to the back again, inserting the needle from right to left to knit one through the back loop, and then I'm going to purl one. And I'm just going to keep on doing this to the end of the needle 1 stitches, these first 33 stitches, and then I will be back to show how to move on to the next 33 stitches, the needle 2 stitches, when you're working with magic loop. I'm just getting to the end of the needle 1 stitches, so I'm purling one and knitting one through the back loop. And I now want to move on to work the needle 2 stitches. So I'm going to turn my work so that the needle 2 stitches are in front. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this cable through. So that these needle 2 stitches are going onto the other needle. This is kind of tight just because it's the first round. It will be much easier and much quicker to do this as we continue knitting the sock. Okay, so my needle 2 stitches are now on the needle and ready to knit. And I'm just going to pull this needle out of the needle 1 stitches so that they're now resting on the cable. And you'll see that we're basically in the same position we were before, but now the needle 1 stitches are on the back and the needle 2 stitches are on the front. In terms of telling where you're at, whether you're working the needle 1 or needle 2 stitches, I just use this tail from the cast on as a sort of marker for that. So the point at which this yarn comes out is the beginning of round, so this is the sort of opposite point halfway through. Also, the last stitch of the needle 1 stitches was a knit 1 through the back loop because there are an odd number of stitches on that needle. So I'm going to start with a purl now to continue that pattern on the needle 2 stitches. So I'm going to make sure that this yarn was held out of the way while I moved the needle 2 stitches into position, and I'm now going to bring it to the front ready to purl. And I'm going to continue working that half twisted rib, but starting with a purl stitch this time. So purl 1, knit 1 through the back loop, and I'm just going to continue doing that to the end of this row. Again, when you're starting the needle 2 stitches, you want to just check again that your cast on edge isn't twisted. Basically, there's a lot to think about right after you've cast on these first couple rounds, and it will become a lot more mindless later. I've reached the end of the needle 2 stitches, so I'm going to show the magic loop turn to work the needle 1 stitches again now, making sure that this yarn is held in the back, and I'm just going to put it over here out of the way, turn my work so the needle 1 stitches are facing me. I'm going to pull on this cable so that I can put these needle 1 stitches onto the needle. And I'm going to pull this back needle from the needle 2 stitches out, ready to start working these needle 1 stitches again. So once again, I'm just going to start doing the half twisted rib round, knit 1 through the back loop, purl 1, and so on. And you basically just want to continue to repeat this round. So half twisted rib, knit 1 through the back loop, purl 1 repeatedly, all the way across all the stitches until you've done 14 rounds. That's 14 rounds in total, so you'll end up working the needle 1 stitches 14 times and the needle 2 stitches 14 times as well. Okay, so I've done my 14 rounds and you can see it really starting to come together. It is looking a bit more like the cuff of the sock now. If I get out the finished sock to compare, you can see we've done this cuff. So the next step is going to be purling 1 round to create this little dividing line. And then I'm going to start doing the lace chart. So I am just going to go ahead and purl this round. And then I will be back to talk about how to read a lace chart. Okay, so I have gone ahead and I've printed out the charts in the pattern. You can find all of these charts in the written pattern, and the charts are slightly different between the 2 sizes. So if you're making the smaller size, you want to check the separate charts for that size. Now, as you can see, there are 2 charts. We have one chart for needle 1 and another for needle 2. And then there's also a key which says what each of the symbols in the chart mean. So to go over these quickly, we have this one is just a regular knit, this one is a regular purl, this is a slip slip knit decrease, so you're going to slip 2 stitches knitwise and then knit them together through the back loop. This one is just a regular knit 2 together, and this one is a yarn over. Now, since we are working this sock in the round, you're going to read each chart from the right to the left like this, starting from the bottom row and working your way up. Once you've worked all the rows of the chart, you'll start again from the first row again, and you should always keep track of what row you're on so that you can pick up in the right place for the next round. I think the best way of demonstrating this would be to give an example, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So, as I mentioned before, the first 33 stitches of this sock are the needle 1 stitches, and so I'm going to be following the needle 1 chart. Then for the other 33 stitches, I'm going to be following the needle 2 chart. So I'm going to be working this pattern from right to left following the chart. So the first thing I have here is a purl, then another purl, and then there are 3 knits in a row. Purl, purl, 5 knits in a row. So let's do this. So I need to do a purl, 3 knits in a row. Purl 2 more, 1 and 2. Now 5 knits in a row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm just going to keep on working across this chart. So I'm now going to do 2 purls, 5 knits in a row, 2 purls, 5 knits in a row, 2 purls, 3 knits in a row, and then 2 purls. And then when I go to work these stitches on the back, the needle 2 stitches, I'm going to start following this chart from this corner. So I'm going to do 5 knits, then 2 purls, 5 knits, then 2 purls, and so on. The second row of the chart, which I will do next, is exactly the same as the first row. So I'm going to do the first 2 rows, and then I'll be back again to start working on this row here, where stuff starts happening. Okay, so I've done those 2 rounds of what is essentially rib. It's almost like a 5x2 rib. In my size, there's a couple of these 3x2s. Again, this varies with the size. I'm now on the 3rd round of the chart, and I've stopped to show you what I'm doing again because the 3rd round of the chart is the one where you start doing lace things. Just as before though, I'm literally just going to read the symbols from right to left and do as it says. So, first off, 2 purl stitches. 1, 2. Okay, so I'm now up to this slightly funny looking symbol, which if we check the chart is a knit 2 together. So I'm literally just going to do the next thing that the chart tells me to do, which is a knit 2 together. Since this pattern does have quite a lot of knit 2 togethers and slip slip knits, this is why it may be easier to use a relatively sharp pair of needles. Anyway, the next thing is the circle. The circle is a yarn over. So for the yarn over, I'm going to bring my yarn through between my needles to the front, and then hold it in the back again, ready to knit for the next stitch. So basically I'm just wrapping the yarn an extra time around the needles. So you see I've got the yarn held in the back, I'm bringing it round to the front between the needles and holding it in the back again, ready to knit the next stitch. So now if I do the next stitch, which if you check the chart, there's another knit, you'll see that I have my stitch here and a stitch here, and then this middle one is the yarn over. Hopefully you can see what that yarn over looks like. Anyway, next thing is 2 purls. Purl 1, purl 2, and now I'm doing the same thing as I did before. So I have another knit 2 together, yarn over and knit 1, and I'm just going to do those in the same way. Knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 1. And then the next thing I'm doing is another yarn over and a slip slip knit. So to do this again, bringing my yarn through and holding it in the back again. And now I'm going to just slip slip knit, so I'm going to insert my needle, my right needle into the stitch as if I'm going to knit it, but just slip it. Do that again. And then I'm going to insert my left needle into those 2 stitches I just slipped from left to right. Yarn over and lift them off. So this slip slip knit is basically like a mirror image of a knit 2 together. Maybe you can see how that slip slip knit just here is the mirror image of the knit 2 together here, and again we have the yarn over here. So these 5 stitches are now 1 stitch from the knit 2 together, 1 from the yarn over, a regular knit, a yarn over, and a slip slip knit. So continuing to read the chart, I'm going to purl 2 and then I'm going to do all of that again. So I'm going to knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 1, yarn over, slip, slip, knit. And this is sort of the repeat. For all but these funny 3 wide columns, for all the other columns, we're going to be doing this every 4th row. So continuing to read the chart, I'm going to purl 2, knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 1, yarn over, slip, slip, knit, purl 2, and then I'm up to one of those funny 3 wide ribs again. So if you just follow the chart, you'll see it. It's a regular knit, then the yarn over, then the slip, slip, knit. So let's just do that. The regular knit, the yarn over, slip, slip, knit. I should point out, by the way, that I'm making this look a lot harder than it is because it's quite tricky to knit with my hands behind my camera. Like, I can't really see what I'm doing. And so if it looks a little bit laboured, I promise it's really not. I've done my work and I'm going to work the needle 2 stitches, and I'm following this row 3 in the chart as well. This is even simpler. I'm just doing that repeat all the way across. So knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 1, yarn over, slip, slip, knit, purl 2, and keep doing that up until the end of the round. I will start doing it just so I can show you. So I'm going to jump straight in with the knit 2 together, knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 1, yarn over, slip, slip, knit. You will really get into a routine with this. Purl 2. So I have now finished working round 3, which is the lace row. And if you look at what is next, row 4, it's just another of these regular rib rows. In fact, row 4, 5 and 6 are all just these plain rib rows. So I'm going to do those 3 rows in exactly the same way I did row 1 and row 2. I keep saying row, it should technically be a round since I'm knitting in the round, but you know what I mean. So purl 2, and then this is the knit 3. I'm going to knit 1, and then you'll see that the next stitch that I'm knitting is the one that was a yarn over. So basically when I knit this stitch, you'll see that it leaves a big hole there. And that is exactly what we want. That hole is going to be the hole in the lace. So if I pull the finished sock up again to show you, this is the knit 2 together, that's the hole made from knitting the yarn over, the regular knit, the hole made, and the slip slip knit. And we're basically just going to keep on doing this. So I'm going to work all the rows in the charts, and then I'm going to do it again, and so on until I've done, I think in here I did 6 repeats of each chart. But the thing is, this is totally up to you. You could do 6. If you wanted a shorter sock, you could do like 3 or 4. If you like a much longer sock, you can do that. Obviously, the yarn consumption will vary, but I would say that if you have 100 grams of yarn, you can do quite a few more repeats than I've done, and you should be fine for the amount of yarn you have. I will check back in once I've done a few more rounds, and you can see the lace pattern starting to form. So I'm back now that I have finished the leg. At this point, you can keep on going until the leg is whatever length you want. It may end up looking slightly shorter when you're wearing it than it looks right now, because the fabric will be stretched out, and this can make it shrink a little bit in length, and also it just looks shorter because the ratio is different. Also, your lace might not look super pretty. You can probably see mine isn't looking the prettiest. It's kind of just a confusing mess. Don't worry about this. When you block and wear it, it will open out, and again, I'll show the finished sock. You can see how smooth and pretty this is. This will end up looking exactly the same as this in the end, so just don't worry about it too much. Now, for my sock, I did 6 repeats of the chart, which means I've done 12 rows with eyelets in them. So it's easy to count how many little holes there are in your knitting to figure out how many repeats you've done. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The pattern says that you need to finish with either a row 4 or row 8 of the chart. I did the little eyelets on the last row, so I have to do one more row, which would be a row 8 of the chart, I guess, before I can start the heel flap. So I've finished row 8 of the chart, meaning the next round is going to be round number 1. Now these stitches, the needle 1 stitches, form the instep. So to show you a finished sock, we're at this point working this direction. maybe it's easier if I show it this way up. We've reached this point, and these stitches here are the needle 1 stitches where the lace pattern continues, and then the needle 2 stitches on the back, you're going to stop working the lace pattern over them. We're going to do the heel flap, heel turn, and so on, and then from that point onwards it's going to be all done in stockinette. So we're going to be starting the heel flap over the needle 2 stitches, and so the first step is just to work the needle 1 stitches. So to do this, I'm just going to work the next round of the chart. So since I just did round 8, I'm going to work round 1 of the chart here. And once you've done this, we're not going to be going back to the needle 1 stitches for a little while we do the heel. So you're probably going to want to make a note somewhere of what round of the chart you're going to be doing next, so that when you next go back to those needle 1 stitches, you remember where to carry on. Okay, so I've done the needle 1 stitches, and I'm going to turn and prepare to work needle 2 stitches. But I'm not going to be doing the lace pattern here. This is where we start to work that heel flap. So the first row of the heel flap is going to be a setup row. When you look at the heel flap of this finished sock, you'll see that it has this sort of ribbed look to it. This is achieved using slip stitches, which also make this heel flap thicker, so it's going to wear better and you're less likely to get holes in it. So for this first row, the first thing you want to do is slip that first needle 2 stitch purlwise, meaning we're going to insert that right needle as if we're going to purl the first stitch, but instead of wrapping the yarn, we're going to just slip it off the needle. And then the next thing you're going to do is knit 1 normally. And we're going to keep on repeating those 2 stitches, so slip 1 with yarn in back, and then knit 1 normally, until you have 1 stitch remaining. So slip 1, knit 1, slip 1, knit 1, and so on. Okay, so I have 1 stitch left. Now we needed to have an odd number of stitches in order to be able to do this centered symmetrical lace pattern, but to work this heel flap easily, I want an even number of stitches, and for that reason I'm going to do an increase now so that I have an even number of stitches. And the increase that I'm going to do is an M1L. So basically I'm going to insert this left needle into the bar between these 2 stitches, and I'm going to insert that needle from front to back through that bar, and then I'm going to knit that picked up bar through the back loop. Just like we did when we were working the half twisted rib for the cuff. This increase is a little bit fiddly, but it's the only time we're going to be doing it. And then I'm going to knit that last stitch. So I've now increased 1 stitch and I have 34 stitches on needle 2. Now, normally I would then turn and start working the needle 1 stitches, but we're working this heel flap, it's a flap, it's going to work flat on the needle 2 stitches only. So what I'm going to do is just turn my work and ignore these needle 1 stitches on the cable. We're working these needle 2 stitches back again flat. So this is the first row of the repeating pattern that we're going to use for the heel flap. The first stitch of this pattern is, we're just going to slip 1 again, purlwise. Holding the yarn in front like this, I'm just going to insert the needle as if to purl and slip it off. And then I'm going to purl all the rest of the stitches to the end of the row. So I'm purling 33 to the end of the row. So this is going to be the wrong side row in the 2 row repeat that we're going to use. Okay, so I have purled to the end of the row, and now row 2 of the 2 row repeat for the heel flap is the right side row. So turning back to work the needle 2 stitches from the right side again. It's a repeat basically exactly like we did for that setup row, but without the increase. So I'm going to slip 1 purlwise, slip that stitch, and then knit 1. Slip 1, knit 1, slip 1, knit 1, and so on all the way to the end of the row. You're going to keep on repeating those 2 rows until, for this size at least, you've worked those 2 rows a total of 17 times. So you've done a total of 34 rows, and I'll be back at that point, I guess. So I have done my 17 repeats in total, so that includes the first one that you did. I've worked rows 1 and 2 17 times in total, and you can see the kind of pattern I'm left with. So it almost looks ribbed, and these bigger stitches that carry over 2 rows are caused by slipping stitches on the right side rows. Now the next row is a wrong side row, and this final row of the heel flap we're going to use to decrease out that extra stitch that we increased during the first heel flap row so that we have 33 stitches again. So it's almost like the other wrong sides rows that we've done. I'm going to slip 1 purlwise with the yarn in front. Then I'm going to purl 2 together, and then purl to the end of the row. So in total, including the row where I increased and the row where I decreased again, this heel flap is 36 rows in total. Because you slip the first stitch of each row, that means there are going to be 18 of these stitches along the edge, like this. And we're going to pick stitches up there later. First of all though, we have to do the heel turn. Now it can be a little bit confusing as to why you even need a heel turn. Basically, we're going to be working some short rows, which gives this end of the heel flap more of a curved shape, which will fit the foot a little bit better. Perhaps you can see on the bottom of this finished sock. This is the bottom of the heel flap, and there's a curved edge here, rather than it being straight across. This part honestly isn't too difficult, and I'm just going to walk you through all of the steps. So, firstly, I'm going to slip the first stitch purlwise with the yarn in the back, and I'm going to begin to knit across. But you want to stop when there are 11 stitches remaining before the end of the row. Let's check that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Nice. So now we're going to do a decrease. We're going to do a slip, slip, knit, decrease, which we've already done a bunch in the lace pattern, so we know how to do it. So slip, slip, knit. And then you're going to knit one more. So there should now be 8 stitches left before the end. And at this point I'm going to turn my work and we're going to work back across. So we're sort of doing short rows. But if you've done short rows before, not for socks, if you've done German short rows or something, you probably had to use a special technique here after you've turned in order to close the gap. We're not going to do that. We're going to let there be a hole because we're going to close it up later. So to start this row on the wrong side, we're going to slip one purlwise with yarn in front, and then purl to, again, 11 stitches before the end. Then I'm going to purl 2 together. So I'm just going to be purling the next 2 stitches as though they're a single stitch. I'm going to purl one more, and again I should have 8 stitches remaining before the end of the row, and I'm going to turn my work. Now this is going to be now the first row of the 2-row repeat that we're going to be doing to finish this heel turn. So pay attention to this row and the next row because this is what you'll be repeating. So again, we're going to start off by slipping a stitch, and then we're going to knit up until 1 stitch before the gap that was formed by turning and not doing a special short row turn to close the gap. So you can see I have 1 more stitch here, and then I have this big gap that was caused by the turn last time. So I'm now going to do another slip, slip, knit. Slip, slip, knit. So I'm slip, slip knitting that stitch before the gap and the stitch after the gap together, and that closes up the gap. Knit one more. So now we're turning with 6 stitches remaining. I'm going to turn my work, and I'm going to do something similar again. So this is the second row of the repeat. I'm going to slip one purlwise with yarn in front this time. I'm going to purl to 1 stitch before, again, that same gap. So you can see I have this 1 stitch here, and then there is this gap next to it. So I'm going to purl the stitches before and after the gap together to close the gap. Purl 1, and there are 6 stitches remaining. I'm going to turn my work, and this is basically what you're going to repeat. So each time you want to either knit or purl to 1 stitch before the gap, and then slip, slip, knit on the right side, or purl 2 together on the wrong side, and then make sure you knit 1 or purl 1 after that decrease as well. So this time the turns are with 6 stitches remaining. You do it again and there'll be 4 stitches remaining, and then 2, and then finally 0. So just keep on going until you've started working all of the heel stitches. So I guess I will just continue doing that, and then I will be back. So I'm currently on a right side row, and I've reached that 1 stitch before the gap point again, and you can see that it's actually only 3 stitches before the end. So if I do my slip, slip, knit, and knit 1, I am at the end of the row, and that means that this one now is going to be the final row of the heel turn. So again, I'm going to slip, purl to 1 before the gap, purl 2 together, purl 1, and that will be the end of the row. So that heel turn is now done, and you can see how it looks. We've created this rounded shape for the bottom of the heel. But the next step will be to pick up stitches along here, and then we're going to be working in the round again, now in this direction, to create the foot. Also, this is the difficult part done. Once you've done this whole heel section, it's easy all the way to the end again. So the first thing I'm going to do is knit across these heel stitches. I should point out while I'm doing this that everyone has a different way of doing all this. I'm just going to show you the way that I do it. I would recommend trying out different sock patterns by different designers and trying out their favourite techniques and, seeing which one you like the most. Okay, so now I'm going to pick up 18 stitches along this edge. This heel flap is 36 rows, and we slipped the stitch at the start of each row, so there are, or at least there should be, 18 places to pick up stitches in these slip stitches along the side of the heel flap. So for example, let's see, you want to pick up the stitches into these positions, so under each of these V's along the side of the heel flap. So one here, and so on. One here, if I can grab both legs of it, here. So I'm going to continue using this right needle to pick up those stitches. So I'm going to insert the needle into one of those V's along the side of the heel flap, yarn over, and then carefully lift off, and I have a picked up stitch. That's one. Let me do that again into the next one. 2, 3. I'm going to repeat that 18 times in total. So I have picked up my 18 stitches along that side of the heel flap, and now I'm going to adjust since I'm working magic loop, so I'm ready to work these needle 1 stitches. Now at this point you can jump straight into just working those needle 1 stitches from whatever row of the chart you wrote down that you needed to pick up from after completing the heel. But if you do that, you're going to be left with a little hole inside of your sock just here. It will be sort of round here on the finished sock. And this is not a problem. You can sew it up at the end and it will be invisible and it's not a problem. But if you want to hide that, I'll show you one way of doing it. I'm basically going to pick up an extra stitch here and purl it together with the first stitch of the row, since it is a purl stitch according to the pattern. This is going to be quite fiddly to do, given I can't really see what I'm doing very well with the camera here, but you want to insert your needle into the column of stitches on the right here and pick up a stitch like so. I'm going to bring the yarn to the front since this is going to be a purl, and purl that extra picked up stitch together with the first stitch of the row. Now there are a lot of different ways of closing this gap. If this doesn't work for you, try out a different one. There are a lot of tutorials on YouTube. But I'm going to carry on working those needle 1 stitches according to the row of the chart that I noted down that I'll be picking up from, which for me I believe is row 2 of the chart. If you're closing up the holes at this point, stop 1 stitch before the end of the needle 1 stitches, and you're going to slip that stitch knitwise, and then again pick up that stitch from the column of stitches on the left there. When you pick up a stitch, you want to make sure that the right leg is in the front, because that's how the stitches are positioned, although I am just going to slip it knitwise again, so it doesn't matter. The left leg would have been correct. But you want it to end up with the left leg in front, both of these 2 stitches. And then I'm going to transfer them back to my left needle, and if we were doing a slip-slip knit, you would at this point knit the 2 together through the back loop. But we are doing a slip-slip purl, so we need to purl these 2 together from the back loop, and this is sort of the most fiddly standard knitting stitch. You want to insert your needle through both stitches from bottom to top, like that, if you can see. And then you can purl. I'm just going to reposition again. Now, as we pick up these stitches on the other side of the heel flap, you're going to end up with a lot of stitches on needle 2, and it is a little bit uncomfortable, but it will become easier to knit again as we decrease them out. Anyway, I'm just going to go ahead and pick up my 18 stitches along the side of the heel flap again. And with those 18 stitches picked up, I'm going to knit across the stitches on the heel flap again. This will all feel a little bit tight and a little bit uncomfortable. Don't worry about it. So I'm knitting across the stitches that were left after the heel turn. And now I'm reaching the end of those stitches. I'm also going to be knitting along those newly picked up stitches along the side of the heel flap. And I'm basically going to be stopping right before I would sort of readjust my needles using magic loop to work the needle 1 stitches again. Okay, so now we're at that point, let's stop and have a look at how things are so you can see how these stitches are arranged. These are the needle 1 stitches, and these just consist of those instep stitches over which you're working the lace chart. And then these are the needle 2 stitches, which consist of the stitches at the end of the heel flap after the heel turn, and also these newly picked up stitches on each side of the heel flap. Now, the stitch distribution is not very even. There are still 33 stitches on here, but I've picked up a bunch here, and so there are loads, which is why it's kind of uncomfortable to knit. But the next phase of the sock knitting process is I'm going to, each round, continue working the chart across the needle 1 stitches as usual, and I'm going to work stockinette along these stitches, but every other row I'm going to do decreases. So I'm going to decrease out on these needle 2 stitches until I have 33 remaining, and the stitches are evenly distributed between the 2 needles again. If you look at the finished sock, you can see here, this is where that line of decreases are. So we start off with this really big round with all of this stockinette here on needle 2, and then we're going to decrease until there is an equal amount of lace and stockinette on the 2 needles, and then continue to knit the sock to length. So to do this, we're going to be doing a 2-row repeat. I'm not even going to show round 1 because it's really easy. Round 1, we're going to work the next round of the chart on needle 1, and then you're just going to knit all of the stitches on needle 2. So yeah, chart, stockinette, just knit, and I'll be back again after I've done round 1. Okay, so I have completed the round 1. You can't really tell, but I worked the chart across here and stockinette across here, and now I'm going to do round 2. This is the one where the decreases are going to happen. Firstly though, as usual, I'm just going to work the chart, whatever the next row of the chart is, over the needle 1 stitches. This is always going to be the case, like throughout the rest of the sock up until the toe. We're going to be always working the next round of the chart over the needle 1 stitches. Everything else happens over the needle 2 stitches. Okay, so that's the needle 1 chart stitches worked. I'm going to readjust my magic loop, ready to work these needle 2 stitches. And this is where the decreases happen. So you're going to begin by knitting 1, and then we're going to do a slip slip knit, like so. Now you can knit across all of these needle 2 stitches until there are 3 stitches remaining. There are so many stitches on needle 2 right now. This is taking so long. The nice thing about knitting socks cuffed down like this is that the number of stitches decreases as you get closer to finishing the sock. So you'll find that as you're working on this section, it starts to go faster and faster as you get closer to finishing the gusset. This section is called the gusset. I'm not sure if I mentioned that, this little decrease section. Okay, getting close. There you go, you can see now there are 3 stitches remaining. So I'm going to knit 2 together because that's sort of the mirror image of the slip slip knit we did on the other side, and then knit 1. And that is the decrease round completed. So basically I'm going to carry on in this way. Each round I'm going to do the needle 1 stitches just according to the next row of the chart, and then I'm going to alternate. So on round 1 you just knit all of the needle 2 stitches, and on round 2 you're going to knit 1, slip slip knit until 3 stitches remain, knit 2 together and knit 1 on needle 2. So you want to keep on repeating those 2 rounds until you've worked them, I think for this size, maybe a total of 13 times. But basically you want to keep on going until there are 33 stitches left on needle 2. So in other words, there are an equal number of stitches on needle 1 and needle 2. I find it's easier to not keep count of how many repeats I've done and just occasionally keep an eye on how many stitches I have on needle 2 so I see when it's approaching 33. But once you have 33 stitches on each needle again, you can basically just continue working the chart over these stitches and then knitting these stitches without any additional decreases to continue with the foot. So you can see here is a section where I was doing the decreases, and at this point I have an equal number of stockinette stitches as lace stitches, so I'm just going to keep on working the lace on needle 1 and the stockinette on needle 2 until the sock is the correct length. And I will be back in a little bit to discuss finding the correct length for your foot, but for now I'm just going to head off and keep doing that. Okay, now that I'm getting there with this, we can talk a little bit about sizing in terms of length this time. So your sock should have negative ease in both directions. So you want negative ease around the foot, and you also want negative ease in terms of length. There are sort of two main ways I would recommend choosing the length of your sock. The first method is to just try it on. Because we're knitting it cuff down, you can basically just put the sock on your foot and see when the amount more that you need to knit is like 5 centimeters or just under that. And at that point you can start on the toe. If you are knitting socks for someone else or you don't want to try it on, you can also do it in terms of foot length and measure. In that case, you want to measure from the back of the heel turn here to the end, and you want the total length of the sock, including the toe, to be about 2 centimeters less than your actual foot length. You can measure your foot length or look up online like EU40 foot length and you'll find the measurements. I will do some calculations and figure out exactly how long the toe is, and I'll put the number here. So that's how much extra you have to add on for the toe. And if that plus the length of your sock is your foot length minus 2, then it's a good point to start the toe. So once again, like for the point where you started the heel, you want to make sure that you're finishing with a row 4 or 8 of the chart. The toe is again a really simple 2-row repeat. So the first thing that I'm going to do is knit 1 plain round in stockinette. This is going to be the first row of the repeat, so I'll knit across both the needle 1 and needle 2 stitches. So I've done my plain stockinette round, and then for the second row of the 2-row toe repeat, it works like this. So I'm going to knit 1, then slip slip knit, and then I'm going to knit to 3 stitches before the end of needle 1. Okay, 3 stitches left, and then I'm going to knit 2 together and knit 1. So I'm doing a knit 1, slip slip knit to 3 stitches before the end, knit 2 together and knit 1, and then I'm going to turn my work and do the exact same thing on needle 2. So knit 1, slip slip knit to 3 stitches before the end of needle 2, knit 2 together, knit 1, and that's the decrease round. So you're going to alternate doing a plain round of stockinette and one of these rounds where you decrease 4 stitches, one at the start and one at the end of each of the 2 needles. Basically, you want to keep on repeating these 2 rounds, decreasing on alternate rounds, until you have 13 stitches left on each needle for this size. I'll be back at that point to show you how to seam up the toe. Okay, so I am left with 13 stitches on each needle, so I have 26 stitches in total here. I've gone ahead and I've cut my yarn. I've left a bit of length so that I have enough to start the toe, and also I leave a good long end to weave in, and I went ahead and threaded my needle. We basically want to use something called Kitchener stitch to close the toe, so again that's a technique you can Google if you don't find this particular video to be clear enough. There are lots of other tutorials. We're basically going to be sewing together these live stitches so that the fabric is sort of seamless over the toe. So first of all, let's do the setup for that. You're going to insert your needle into the first stitch on needle 1 as if you're going to purl and pull through. Don't drop anything off the needle right yet. And then insert your needle into the first stitch on needle 2 as if to knit, pull through. So that's the setup for the Kitchener stitch done. Let's do the Kitchener stitch. So the steps for the Kitchener stitch that we're going to repeat are as follows. Insert your needle knitwise into the first stitch on needle 1, and you can drop it off needle 1. Then insert purlwise onto the next stitch, but leave it there. Now we're going to insert the needle purlwise into the first stitch on needle 2 and let it fall off. And then knitwise into the second stitch, but leave it in the needle. And make sure when you're doing this, you want to keep this tail below your 2 knitting needles. See that's getting looped over? Make sure that it doesn't. Okay, so let's do that again because that's what we're going to be repeating. knitwise through the first stitch on needle 1 and off, purlwise, then purlwise through the first stitch on needle 2 and off, and then knitwise. And again, knitwise through the first stitch on needle 1 and off, then purlwise through, purlwise through the first stitch on needle 2 and off, knitwise. You basically just want to continue to repeat those steps. You can kind of see how we're getting this sort of seamless join over the end of the toe. So I have 1 stitch left on each needle. I'm going to go knitwise through the first stitch on needle 1 and let it drop off. And then the next thing you would be doing for the Kitchener stitch is going purlwise through the next stitch on needle 1, but we have no more stitches on needle 1. Now, I don't know how great this is practice-wise, but I'm just going to shove the needle through the corner of the sock there, and then go purlwise through this last stitch. Okay, so here is what you should have at this point in the process. It's basically a finished sock. You just have to do a few little bits and pieces to get it to look really pretty. Firstly, dealing with these ends. The end on the cuff you can just weave in on the wrong side of the cuff, just weave it on the inside and cut off any excess. And for the end on the toe, you can just use a needle to pull the end through to the inside of the sock and then sew it in on the inside of the toe. You may notice though that this sock is still looking pretty sad and ugly compared to this lovely finished sock. And the magical step that makes it go from this to this and really opens up the lace so that you can see what's going on and see all the hard work you put in is blocking. The first part of the blocking process is really easy. You want to stick some water into a sink or a bowl. I would suggest lightly warm water, but not anything too hot. Most sock yarns are made of superwash wool, so you're not really at risk of them felting, but just to be on the safe side, because some aren't, I would suggest not making the water too hot, and when you're soaking the sock in it, don't agitate it too much. You can use some wool wash at this point, add it into your water as you're running it, so that the sock can be cleaned for the first time as you block it. You can leave it to soak for, say, 20 minutes, and then take it out and gently squeeze out any water left in the sock. Don't twist it or do anything like that because it can make it lose its shape. Just gently squeeze out any excess water. Now you might have seen these things around. These are sock blockers and they're specifically designed for blocking socks. You can buy them in your shoe size and they're often sort of hollow on the inside so that the air can pass through the sock and it will dry really quickly. Once you have pressed the excess water out of your sock, you can just go ahead and put it onto the sock blocker and let it dry on the sock blocker like this. If you don't have a sock blocker though, don't worry. I honestly wouldn't suggest buying one of these if it's your first time knitting socks. For probably the first 6 months when I was knitting a lot of socks, I used my own sock blocker that I made out of a cardboard box. I measured the length of my foot, drew a shape like this, cut it out and then covered it in cling film, and while it took a little bit longer for the socks to dry, it worked just fine. You don't even need that though, you can actually just lay the sock out flat to dry, and while it won't look quite so perfect when it's not being worn, it'll look totally fine once it's on foot. So of course, the only other thing that you have to do to finish is make a second sock. For this, it might be useful to count how many repeats you've done in the leg and in the foot, so that you don't have to figure out the sizing all over again. But other than that, you can pretty much just knit it up exactly the same way. People tend to call it the second sock syndrome when they really struggle to knit up the second sock, but I'm somebody who finds that the second sock normally goes really quickly because I'm so excited to have a finished pair of socks. So do let me know whether you find you have second sock syndrome or whether you're a super fast second sock knitter. I feel like the second sock never takes me more than a couple of days because I'm so enthusiastic about it. If you enjoyed this video, like, leave a comment, whatever. If people seem to be enjoying it and seem to be following this tutorial, I will make sure to make another similar video again soon. Hopefully it won't be another year wait like there was between the jumper tutorial last summer and the sock tutorial this summer. I do want to make a cardigan tutorial soon and some other things, fingers crossed. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and goodbye.